Russia doesn't have the defense industrial base set up to resupply this quickly because there's so much corruption that's gone on. Putin is trying to do that, but I don't think he's got the time to set it out and to do it. He's running out of stocks. Ukrainians are getting access to global stocks from so many NATO countries.
The European Parliament have now formally declared Russia to be a state sponsor of terrorism. Now, as a gesture, what weight do you attach to that? And would it be just water off a duck's back in Moscow?
I don't think it's going to be water off a duck's back. I think it's actually more significant than people are making out. Given the fact that the European Parliament has to get a consensus of all members to vote anything through. We've got Hungary must have voted for it to get through, and as a statement to Vladimir Putin, that's much stronger than anything that even comes out of the United Nations General Assembly, I think, because of the economic ties that there have been historically between a lot of European countries and with Russia. So I think it's significant.
So Philip, here's another thing, as it were, more close to the military conflict. The Britain is now sending, as you'll probably know, first helicopters to Ukraine. Yeah. 10 crews have been trained in the use of these helicopters. In itself, it doesn't seem like a huge dispatch of equipment, but it is significant, isn't it?
It is significant. It's the first manned aircraft that the UK have sent across. We've given them lots of unmanned aerial vehicles and other bits and pieces, as have the international community. But this is the first time that aircraft that require people to operate them have been sent in by the UK. What we've been seeing the whole way through the conflict so far is a creeping increase of what started off as weapons for defensive purposes only, now into weapons and equipment that can be used for more offensive purposes. Now, these helicopters themselves are not armed. They are search and rescue helicopters or former search and rescue helicopters, but they can move large numbers of troops very effectively, and therefore will be a good enhancement.
Right, now, obviously, you can't give us a comprehensive audit of the equipment and the power of Ukrainian forces, but just weigh up for us your appraisal of the state of Ukrainian equipment and arms now compared to Russia, because from what we see here, there does seem to be something of an imbalance in a positive way for Ukraine.
There is we got the balance, our analysis of the balance wrong whenever the Russia's special military operation first started, because people counted numbers and thought, they've got a big number, they've got a small number, therefore a big number is going to win. But it didn't take into consideration the availability of it, whether it worked, whether they could resupply it with fuel and ammunition and get their logistics right, whether the people knew how to operate it. It quickly became apparent that the Ukrainians, with a smaller number of pieces of equipment that could be supported, they knew how to operate, they could fight them properly together, was stronger than this organization with huge numbers. And as Russia has been attrited the whole way through and losing more and more equipment, and Russia is probably the largest supplier of military equipment to the Ukrainians, because Ukrainian farmers are very good at taking it away. Ukraine's military equipment capability has been increasing and has been changing from the old Soviet stuff to more Western equipment, and that means that the Western defense industrial bases can support them more.
Yes,
Putin's running out of ammunition, whereas Zelensky's got almost unlimited supplies.
I mean, Ukraine's Western supporters and friends and allies have been sending ever more sophisticated weaponry and munitions to Ukraine. Is much being held now back for I don't know, a reluctance to give Ukraine too much of an offensive capability, and in that way risk an escalation in tension with Russia? Not that things could get very much more tense than they are now.
Yeah, I think there's a balance here. One of the most difficult things to do when you're engaged in a conflict is to bring in new capabilities and new pieces of equipment and integrate them with what you're using to fight at the moment. And because each piece of equipment is extremely complex, it brings with it massive logistic tails for those that need to repair it, fix it, the spare parts that are needed, the nuances and how to operate it. That takes many months or years to learn how to do.
Yes.
And therefore, the more different types you bring in, the greater the complexity there is for the Ukrainians, the harder it is for them to fight these pieces of equipment together. So I think it's working with the Ukrainians, understanding what they need, understanding where things can be brought in that will add real value, rather than just throw stuff at them that looks good on paper politically, but doesn't actually help them militarily.
Yeah, and what about on the Russian side, they've been looking increasingly, haven't they, to Iran for munitions and ammunition. And I'm reading today that Russia's nearly exhausted its current stock of Iranian weapons.
They have, and the UK Ministry of Defence Intelligence has said that Russian munition stocks, and they've used the general terms, so it's across the board, are getting very low indeed. And they've been looking to Iran for these kamikaze drones that they've been using. They're in negotiations for longer range missiles. They've also been looking to the likes of North Korea, and there's been reports on negotiations with North Korea. That to me says that Russian military stocks are very, very low indeed. And Russia doesn't have the defense industrial base set up to resupply this quickly because there's so much corruption that's gone on. Putin is trying to do that, but I don't think he's got the time to set it out and to do it. He's running out of stocks. Ukrainians are getting access to global stocks from so many NATO countries because they're now using NATO natures of ammunition.
Right now, meanwhile, just a thought on, I don't know, the strategic picture, because I've been seeing one or two of the hardline Russian commentators that you see on. I certainly see the clips on from Russian TV, and they're talking about Kazakhstan, one of those Central American countries said to be comparatively close to Russia, and complaining that Kazakhstan and some of those other Central European countries are not as close or supportive as Russia as they would wish. Even a suggestion of a threat to Kazakhstan. How do you read all that?
Well, I think it's the old Soviet states that are looking at it, and they're looking at this sort of central Russian bit that was the master controller of all countries in the old Soviet Union. And they're going, well, he's not this strong master controller anymore, and actually we're happier being completely independent and looking at what's going on. And their military strength is being reduced enormously after they carry out this special military operation into Ukraine, and therefore they're not as big a threat as they used to be. There's a lot of stuff will come out in the information domain. There's a lot of fighting going on in the war of words from all sides, and they're having a real effect. The closest country to Russia is Belarus, and they're not engaging properly.
Philip, really good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us, sharing your expertise. Philip Ingram there, former British Army colonel, co-founder of the Independent Defence Authority.